Okay, honestly, I tried not to talk about this. I did my video after the first two episodes released. Sure, yes, I did. I said my piece on how the show felt bad compared to expectations, and the internet has already filled up with episode reviews, breakdowns, and critical analysis after the release of episode 6. But the more I thought about this, looked at videos, read reviews, and really dug into my own thoughts on the franchise, the more upset I've become. It seems like every time I discuss Lord of the Rings, I feel a need to prove my credentials, if you will. To be honest, that doesn't seem entirely healthy. Lord of the Rings can be for everyone, not just those who've read the Silmarillion, own the books, or played 100 of the video games. However, the Rings of Power is not for everyone. It's not for true fans of the source material, it's not for discerning critics, or even moderately intelligent fantasy watchers. It's garbage made for an audience who probably aren't even really watching. That right there will already cause backlash. Believe me, I know. Oh my god, I like the show, and he said it's not even for moderately intelligent fantasy viewers. How could he? Yes, inflammatory. Yes, I just insulted quite a few people who will watch this video. But after watching as much of the series as I have now done, after seeing what Amazon has created, and most of all, after witnessing what has happened with critical discourse surrounding the series, the gloves are coming off. There is something that needs to be said right from the start. This show does not have amazing visuals and grand set pieces. This might be a shock to some people, since pretty much every single critic out there has at least acknowledged that one positive aspect. But in reality, no, it doesn't. Whether or not they admit this publicly to you, creators, critics, and fans alike fall into one of two categories. Either they support the show as a result of a perceived agenda, thereby praising anything they can find that is even moderately passable within it, or they are trying to avoid the screeching mob mentality of those agenda-driven fans. So they latch onto a common thread of praise so as to try and mitigate some of the tedium. Picture this. Rings of Power is an atrocity of cinema. It's terribly written to a degree where a high school senior with a passion for fantasy could have easily done better. Its acting is ridiculously bad in some of the most critical main stage areas, to a point where you don't even want to watch the characters you're supposed to admire, and the set pieces, when you consider the fact that every single episode has a budget nearly as large as mainstream feature-length cinematic films, are bland, unimpressive, and disappointing. Now picture that the show itself appeals most strongly to a vocal subset of the audience who are prone to aggressive, nearly slanderous tactics in an effort to suppress or destroy anyone that they don't like. What is the result? I'll tell you what the result is. The result of these two factors, like oil and water, is an inability to mix together. Critics of the show are faced with a group of people who will call them every variation of ist or phobic you can imagine as soon as they speak badly about the show in any capacity, regardless of the reason behind that criticism. And yet, for any honest content creator, praising this piece of garbage isn't an option. How do you navigate this? Well, the answer is simple. The widespread and now mainstream lie of grand set pieces and stunning visuals is born because critics are desperately trying to pepper in something they can sing praises for to stave off the insufferable, incessant, and utterly ridiculous response by vocal fans. If you simply criticize the show nonstop, you open yourself to whatever complaints the audience decide to throw at you. For some reason, many creators attempt to avoid the title of being too negative. I hate when people fucking say that, as if it is some sort of stigmatized failure. I myself did this with my prior video, God only knows why, and the way that they try to do that is by latching onto one aspect that seems popular and successful, praising it alongside everyone else, and using that sprinkled bit of gushing praise as a way to defend their criticism of other more egregious areas. It's far easier to stand up to a mob of spit-flying, ravenous fanboys when you've said a few things that actually praise the show, which is precisely why the narrative has now emerged that the visuals of Rings of Power are somehow impressive, stunning, or engaging. They're not. Now, you'll notice I'm not showing very much footage of the series in the background, which would actually probably complement my criticism of the stunning visuals rather nicely. I'll show a bit of it here and there. Instead, I'm showing a Lord of the Rings RTS game called Battle for Middle-earth 2. I finally got it working, yay for me. And I do this to avoid the dangers of copyright as well as prevent an endless loop of trailer scenes from playing on repeat. I'll punctuate with important moments, yes, but I acknowledge that this would be superior content were I able to showcase more. Alas, with my vocal criticism being what it is, that merely opens me up to a copyright takedown, with major entertainment companies that have done that to me in the past, as well as many other creators, to silence them when they are overly critical. So I'm just not even going to risk that right now. Perhaps it would be fine and it wouldn't happen in this particular case, but regardless, again, I'd rather just not risk it. Still, having spouted nearly 2 pages of scripted bluster here, it's time for me to back it all up and describe why I believe Rings of Power is a 2 out of 10. It's a garbage program, an insult to Lord of the Rings, and maybe this is the last time I discuss it. Maybe they salvaged some small aspect of the story in the final episodes. Maybe it turns out that I was being too harsh on them, but somehow I doubt it. Every single episode of this show in season 1 alone has a budget higher than the entire movie Braveheart. The money that they are spending rivals feature-length blockbuster films for every episode, and yet the sum total army that a major world power in the Second Age sends to defeat the unknown forces of evil and save the world is 300 men. Bear with me here, 300 men with hundreds of horses that fit into 3 ships and sail across the seas to an unknown foe after the most powerful leaders in the known world have acknowledged that there is significant danger. None of it makes any sense. On a subconscious level, this show is nearly unwatchable. Here's some examples from episode 6 alone, an episode that has been called, I shit you not, a 10 out of 10 by sites like IGN, and is widely regarded as the best episode in the show thus far. First things first, the episode is a giant battle between orcs and villagers. Rather than defending what amounts to a strategically superior position, they collapse a tower onto the army of orcs and fall back. Not to run, mind you, but to fight in a significantly worse position. The audience can feel this, even if it doesn't jump to the front of their mind, but it gets worse. While fighting these orcs, there are random scenes, simply for dramatic tension, where soldiers and orcs do entirely unrealistic things. A massive orc flings the elven soldier, like semi-main character guy, around for 5 minutes straight with his arms, but throughout the majority of that tense encounter, he makes no attempt to find or use a weapon at all. After this ridiculously planned ambush fails, the villagers fall back to a tavern, hiding from a now counter-ambush set by the orcs. Main character Bronwyn, she has been shot twice, mind you twice, by arrows, with arterial bleeding. What would logically happen here? Very few villagers remain, some of them are wounded, the orcs have sprung a trap that worked, and yet everything grinds to a halt. For minutes on end, as they treat the wounded in the tavern. It's gotta be a joke. Subconsciously, anyone who watches this will notice how just strange that is. The orcs have simply just stopped advancing. They've stopped pushing towards the tavern, they were right close to it to begin with, and in essence, they've stopped attacking after a successful ambush, just so that the writers can script a few tense moments inside and basically pause time on the outside. Now, some people might be saying, so what, that's not that bad. So let's continue. A sword hilt, one of the many mysteries that the show relies upon to keep you interested. Who's the man who fell from the sky? Who's the weird stranger we saw for 5 seconds examining the crater? What's the sword hilt for? Who's Sauron? What was in the mystery box that the dwarves had? Etc, etc, etc. Anyway, a sword hilt, clearly some sort of key for the orcs, has now been recovered. Fine, cool, one of the mysteries will be solved, but not before a series of what can only be described as incredibly lazy writing crutches get used to make us think the show is much more profound than it actually is. The 300 Númenóreans, Númenor being a highly advanced, incredibly strong civilization, only sending 300 cavalry to an unknown land to fight the forces of evil, including their fucking queen, and the fighting force is mostly made up of teenagers on top of that. The 300 Númenóreans, back on task, get a beautiful cinematic charge sequence out of nowhere. And I say beautiful with as much sarcasm as I can possibly insert into that word. They are riding full tilt with the sun at their back. That means east to west. Well, wait a second, because when they actually show up at the town, they are coming in west to east. You can tell by the shadows from trees, people, and horses when they get there. They are riding into the sun, which means, I shit you not, that the Númenóreans knew precisely where to go, with absolutely no knowledge of what was happening in Middle-earth at the time, that is, which tiny village to go to, so that they arrived exactly when they needed to, but they didn't actually ride their full tilt in a straight line, no, they rode their full tilt in circles, so that they could get a nice cinematic, slow-mo dramatic shot of the cavalry before they got there, going the complete wrong direction. Not a lot of people are going to notice that, at least not on a conscious level, but subconsciously, you are watching time itself fall apart in the show. We are highly in tune with what the sun does, okay? As human beings, we just are. We know, even without a compass, where sunrise and sunset happens. The Númenóreans go from riding away from the sun to riding towards the sun in a matter of seconds, while the villagers, simultaneously, provide a consistent timeline, where it is still the same morning for them. I have to add this in postscript really quick. There's actually a scene in one of the earlier episodes where a comet flies over and multiple characters in multiple separate subplots and different places see it in rapid sequence, which would be a strong indicator that they all exist in the same timeline. That would be one of the only logical things to extrapolate from this, which makes it even more idiotic when they butcher that timeline without remorse every step of the way afterwards. These 300 Númenóreans on a subconscious level have knowledge that they couldn't possibly know. They got from point A to point B in a way that they couldn't possibly have done, and they did so by writing incoherent patterns around the landscape, also that the writers could have two cliches in a single scene. One, the heroic last-minute rescue, which is tried and true, it's been done a million times, and two, the slow-motion charge with dramatic music and the sun rising behind them because it looks good. That, or it's somehow sunset. They made camp after the slow-motion charge, and then the next morning they rode into town, which means that they exist in an entirely separate temporal world. But it's ridiculous to a degree where you simply can't take the show seriously. How about another one? The sword hilt, it turns out, is a key that unlocks a dam holding back the river. Cool. It's also in an elven fortress, well, the ruins of an elven fortress now, that the villagers abandoned. Here's the problem. Adar and the orcs obviously know what this sword hilt is and what it does, because their tunnel is actually a conduit to the mountain. What does this mean? It means that they didn't even fucking need the key. They could have simply torn down the dam in the fortress that the defenders abandoned and they have full access to, instead of going even remotely near the village and after them. We are now forced to believe or speculate that there is some kind of ancient magic, some sort of reason why the orcs can't take down a simple stone dam. And even if that were true, that the magic is whose? Elves? Sauron? Adar's? What? Even if that were true, there's no explanation for it, and none of it makes any sense. As if that's not enough for a few consecutive scenes of one episode, Adar rides off, chased by Galadriel with a fake sword hilt in his possession. We don't know this yet at the time, but it is. Galadriel chases, and then Halbrand, whoever he is, Sauron, Witch King, whatever, Halbrand comes out from the other side, in front of the man who's been fleeing at breakneck speed the entire time on horseback, simultaneously outrunning Galadriel by a lot, who's used, I guess, special elven words or magic, who knows, some secret special shit to speed up and catch Adar. She whispered it in her horse's ear, after he was very far back when they began the chase, because the laws of physics in this show just aren't a thing. Still, they catch him, fine. Galadriel stops Halbrand from killing Adar. They go back. Galadriel basically says she wants to genocide all the orcs ever, even though they really just want a home away from the sun. Fine, they're evil. Then Galadriel almost kills Adar. Little switcheroo there. Halbrand stops her, and finally, I'm glossing over more of the worst writing you've ever seen in your life, we get to the end where it's revealed that they had a fake sword hilt the entire time, and not a single person thought to check what was inside the cloth after however many hours it's been that it was in their possession. It's sad, really. It's absurd on its face. You have to remember, this is Galadriel, a multi-thousand-year-old respected elf who is hell-bent on genocide. As far back as the first episode, her own troops were mutinying against her because she was so revenge-obsessed she wouldn't even stop for a couple of minutes to save one of their lives. She, in her own words, cannot stop. There is a tempest in me, and is just a shallow husk of a character who impulsively rushes into nearly every single scenario with immature, brash, or disrespectful comments, right? And I understand if you make her angry, but they're making her stupid, immature, and angry like a teenager, like a bratty teen. It doesn't make any sense for her character. It shows absolutely no correlation to what a 1,000-year-old respected and revered elven general would actually be. The writing here is what destroys the entire show. It really does. Lines that sound like the first crack at a middle schooler's dramatic creative English paper. Statements of profound meaning that make you physically cringe. And a seemingly deliberate contradiction of character. The Harfoots, for example, this is the perfect one, will chant ad nauseum, "No one goes off trail and nobody walks alone." But within minutes, they will be discussing how people who fall behind get left to die. All the time. And even openly discuss how they will take the wheels from certain members of the community, condemning them to fall behind, and thus to walk alone. Now, you could explain away some of these things if you really wanted to. Galadriel, for instance, has a deep sense of self-loathing. She is on a journey of approaching darkness until she redeems herself eventually by denying the influence of the One Ring in later years. That kind of fits, I guess, right? If you want to find an explanation, you can. And it's supported by an idea that she's been showing a physical manifestation of that self-loathing in multiple scenes. Example, episode 1, she sees her own reflection in ice and then breaks it with her fist, like, "Whata," to get through. In episode 6, she talks to Adar and nearly kills him because he says, "Your hunt should end by looking in a mirror," or something like that. Once again, indicating that she is on a path to darkness, right, with the kind of mirror significance. But as the show relentlessly bashes us over the head with how intense and amazing powerful she is, it fails to cultivate any actual sense of investment as to why she might be that way. Top to bottom, the show is just a giant collection of missed opportunities. Numenorians, as per actual lore, are extremely tall as 8 feet in some cases. The Peter Jackson trilogy used incredible, nearly genius perspective shots to create the illusion of hobbit-sized actors. It was really incredible work. And yet, with the entire third movie costing roughly $94 million and being 4 hours long, Rings of Power can't even provide something creatively on par. 4 hours of content in Return of the King means 4 episodes for Rings of Power. $94 million versus $240 million. And yet, one of them comes across as grand, cinematic, and profound, while the other takes one of the most iconic human civilizations in its history and lore, Numenor, and has them not be as tall as they should, while sending a bunch of random teenage recruits to Middle-earth on an expedition to fight all of evil, with their queen, going along, making it seem small, badly planned, and very insignificant. I'm not even kidding. If you go back and listen, in one episode, Bronwyn is rallying people in the little elven fortress saying, quote, "Together we can survive this," and then half of them leave, right? Arondir, the elf, praises her son for how brave he is because he stayed, saying it took him 100 years or some shit to be that brave. And 40 minutes later, Bronwyn, after rallying everyone with this huge speech about being brave and fighting and all together, is now herself trying to go surrender and pledge to the side of evil, while Arondir is saying, "Together we can survive this." The story is disjointed. Things flip from one person being a nervous wreck to the other person being a nervous wreck on more than one occasion. Like how Halbrand is about to stab Adar, then Galadriel talks him out of it, then she's about to stab Adar, and Halbrand talks her out of it. These kinds of writing crutches are okay in small doses, but this show is infested with cheap tricks to try and make you think that the story is actually super dramatic, when in reality, it's just lazy. One thing I keep coming back to is that if you think about necessary storytelling devices, Rings of Power just basically doesn't work. For almost any good story throughout history, there is a sort of, usually, inciting event. Example, in Breaking Bad, Walter White finds out he has cancer. Great show, super high profile example, really obvious to pin down the inciting event. Him getting cancer kicks off the entire series with lineage traced back to that one key discovery, right? It fundamentally changes who he is. It's like the inception point for all of the conflict. Without that, there is no show. In Game of Thrones, another high profile example, it is the death of Jon Arryn. Now, at the time, you don't really know just how important this was or how it happened in connection with other characters, which is kind of interesting later on. But it causes Ned Stark to go to King's Landing, where he's eventually executed, beheaded, etc., etc. Every good story has adequate incitement, but Rings of Power effectively doesn't. Galadriel is the main character, it seems, with other semi-main story arcs, but hers is by far the most central, and the inciting event is, I guess, her brother dying. We hear about it, it seems to push her into this deranged arc of bloodthirsty, constant revenge, but the incitement doesn't seem to fit the results. The war in which her brother died affected everyone, not just her, and it was not even remotely unique in this regard. It feels entirely disproportionate. Galadriel has been obsessed since that moment, presumably, but she never even gets close to giving up. Her soldiers mutiny against her. She wants to leave them for dead, still obsessed. Finds the mark of evil in the fortress finally, after so long, still obsessed. Told she can go home across the sea, still obsessed. Over and over, she has this enormously overemphasized revenge arc that isn't adequately based on some sort of inciting event. And without ever even delving this deep into the theory of why this show is garbage, the realization exists even subconsciously. There is one real inciting event in the entire show, and I think it's for the Harfoots. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe there is for someone else's story, but we just don't see it. This is the only other one that I can think of. It's the Harfoots. The man falls from the sky. Now they're on a journey and he is involved, right? Him being the meteor is inciting everything. Okay, cool, right? That makes sense. But the Harfoots are awful to watch and horribly contradictory. The fact that they are the only story tangent that seems to be a plausible, arc with an inciting event is just hilariously perfect in the grand scheme of the show. Lazy writing cliches, completely asinine creative decisions just to have a few more cinematic shots. That stupid cavalry charge really got to me. A total disrespect for realistic travel, that's a big one, with characters showing up hundreds of miles from where they were in completely disjointed amounts of time. What feels like telepathy even, with how characters who were they know where and when to be somewhere, when realistically they would have no idea. All of it is just too much to handle. There are more moments in this show than I can count where you just think, what the fuck? Like how Isildur, a stable boy, okay? a stable boy, is on the hill next to the Numenorian queen, and she looks back like, okay, you can go, they need you. Like, they share this moment when he is a relatively untrained naval dropout or failure who barely got to go, right? He wasn't even supposed to be there, and is basically an embarrassment to his friends and family. Yet he's with the queen. They have special interactions together because he is somehow going to go make a difference in this fight, and she's nodding at him like, go? What? Now, we as an audience know why, and it's because he's super important to the story later on. But realistically, there's absolutely no reason or explanation for why and how characters are interacting here and now. And even when you don't see all of this on a skin-deep level, it wears you down beneath the surface. I could go on for hours. There is far more here that doesn't work compared to what does. And you can pretend that the visuals are stunning like I did to try and mitigate some of the idiotic screeching if I hadn't extended some sort of olive branch. But in truth, it's no more visually appealing than dozens, probably hundreds, of feature-length films that cost a fraction of what this show did for a single goddamn episode. They have taken all the things that should be and twisted them. They have ignored or deliberately crippled the moments that might have been incredible or dramatic, with poor writing, cliches, tropes, and very, very bad explanations. The show has managed to subconsciously fail at almost every single level, and I'm probably not done talking about it, so deal with that. But that's enough for today. Thanks for watching, and have a nice night. 2 out of 10.